What happens when a high-profile guest completely loses control during a live television interview, forcing the host to make an unprecedented decision that shocks millions of viewers? You're about to witness one of the most jaw-dropping moments in morning television history. Michael Strahan had been hosting Good Morning America for years and believed he had seen it all. Difficult guests, awkward moments, technical mishaps. But nothing could have prepared him for what unfolded that morning. The show's producers were thrilled to have booked Meghan Markle for an exclusive interview. It was expected to be a routine promotional segment designed to fill airtime and generate online buzz. Everything in the studio was running smoothly. Meghan arrived on time, went through hair and makeup, greeted the staff warmly, and handed over a list of approved topics. Nothing seemed controversial. The set was arranged for a relaxed, friendly conversation. Michael took his seat, smiling confidently as the countdown began. "Good morning, everyone," he greeted the viewers. "Joining us now is Meghan Markle, and we're excited to talk with her about her latest projects and initiatives." "Thank you for having me, Michael," Meghan replied with her familiar polished tone. The first part of the interview went exactly as planned. Michael asked about her charitable work and upcoming projects. Meghan answered articulately, hitting every talking point. The crew behind the cameras nodded in approval. Everything was on track. Then the tone shifted. Michael asked a simple follow-up about how she approaches different interviews and media outlets. "Well, Michael," Meghan began, her voice suddenly sharper, "not all interviews are created equal, and frankly, not all interviewers are capable of handling certain conversations with the nuance they require." Michael raised his eyebrows but kept his composure. Many guests made media critiques, and he saw an opportunity for a thoughtful discussion. "That's an interesting perspective," he said. "Can you elaborate on what you mean?" Instead of a measured response, Meghan's expression hardened. She leaned forward, her voice lower, more serious. "There are interviewers who understand complex issues," she said, "and then there are those who are better suited for less demanding content. Sports commentary, for instance, requires a very different skill set than discussing matters of real social importance." The air in the studio grew tense. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged worried looks. Michael, a veteran of live TV, responded calmly. "I appreciate that perspective, Meghan. Many of us in broadcasting cover a wide range of topics, and the beauty of this format is learning from our guests' expertise." But Meghan didn't back down. "That's exactly what I'm talking about, Michael," she pressed. "This tendency to oversimplify complex issues, to treat everything like it's the same level of importance. When I come on a show to discuss serious matters, I expect to be speaking with someone who understands their gravity, not someone whose primary experience is discussing batting averages and touchdown passes." Michael's jaw tightened, though his voice stayed steady. "Meghan, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. We invited you for a respectful conversation about your work. Perhaps we can refocus on what you'd like to discuss." Instead of softening, Meghan leaned back with a dismissive gesture. "This is exactly what I mean. This inability to engage with challenging ideas, this retreat to safe, superficial topics when a conversation gets real. It's this kind of intellectual timidity that makes certain media personalities unsuitable for serious discourse." The insult was unmistakable. Michael's co-hosts stared in shock. The floor director waved frantically at the control room, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the confrontation play out. Michael took a slow, deliberate breath, the weight of years of professionalism pressing against a deeply personal sting. What had begun as a friendly morning segment had turned into a live television powder keg. But this was unlike anything he had ever encountered, and he could see that continuing to take the diplomatic approach was only encouraging more aggressive behavior. "Meghan, I'm going to stop you right there," Michael said, his voice firm but controlled. "I've been nothing but respectful to you since you walked into this studio, and I extended an invitation for you to share your message with our viewers. What you're doing right now is not only unprofessional, It's disrespectful. To me, to everyone who works on this show, and to the people watching at home. For a moment, it seemed his direct response might bring the conversation back to a reasonable place. But instead of recognizing she'd gone too far, Meghan became even more agitated. She shifted in her chair, her body language growing more confrontational. "Disrespectful?" she repeated, her voice rising. "What's disrespectful, Michael, is pretending that all opinions and all expertise are equally valuable. What's disrespectful is putting someone like me, who's actually lived through significant experiences and has real insights to share, in a position where I have to pretend that surface-level questions and superficial commentary constitute meaningful journalism." Michael felt his patience thinning, but made one more attempt to salvage the situation. "Meghan, if you have specific topics you'd like to discuss, or questions you think would be more valuable, I'm happy to pivot this conversation in that direction. But what I won't do is sit here and allow you to continue insulting me, my background, or the work everyone here does every day." The reasonable offer only fueled her determination to press on. She leaned forward again, eyes narrowing as she delivered what would prove to be the final straw. "You see, this is exactly the problem with people in your position, Michael," she said sharply. "You think that offering to change the subject somehow addresses the fundamental issue here, which is competence. You can't simply pivot away from the fact that you're out of your depth when it comes to discussing matters of real substance. This isn't about topics, it's about levels of intellectual capacity." The studio fell completely silent. Even the background hum of equipment seemed to vanish as everyone processed what had just been said on live television. Michael's expression hardened. For the first time since the interview began, the mask of diplomacy slipped. "Are you seriously questioning my intellectual capacity on live television?" he asked, his voice low but intense. "Are you actually sitting in my house as a guest on my show, suggesting I'm intellectually inferior to you?" Instead of backing down, Meghan sat back with a smug expression, clearly believing she'd gained the upper hand. "I'm not suggesting anything, Michael," she said coolly. "I'm stating clearly that there are people equipped to handle complex, nuanced discussions about important issues, and there are people better suited to lighter fare. There's nothing wrong with knowing your limitations, but there is something wrong with pretending they don't exist." Michael stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tightening, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that commanded the room. "Let me tell you something, Meghan, and I want you to listen carefully, because this is important. I've been in broadcasting for over 2 decades. I've covered everything, from natural disasters to political elections, from human interest stories to breaking news that changed the world. I've interviewed presidents, Nobel Prize winners, activists, artists, and yes, athletes too. Because guess what? They're human beings with stories worth telling." Meghan tried to interject, but Michael raised his hand and continued, his voice gaining strength. "You walked into this studio as my guest, and I treated you with nothing but respect and professionalism. I prepared thoughtful questions. I gave you a platform to share your message. And I've been patient, even as you've spent the last several minutes insulting not just me, but everyone who works here. And now you have the audacity to question my intellectual capacity." In the control room, producers were split, some urging to cut to commercial, others insisting they let Michael finish. Ultimately, they kept rolling. Michael rose from his chair, towering over Meghan. The movement was deliberate, controlled, and filled with authority. When he spoke again, his voice was calm but final. "I've had enough of this, Meghan. This interview is over. Not because I can't handle difficult conversations or challenging topics, but because I refuse to provide a platform for someone who believes that being disrespectful and insulting constitutes intelligent discourse. You're done here." For the first time, Meghan looked genuinely caught off guard. Her eyes darted around the studio, searching for support. You can't just end an interview because you don't like what I'm saying, she protested, her voice losing its earlier confidence. This is supposed to be a professional conversation. Michael didn't hesitate. You're absolutely right, Meghan. This was supposed to be a professional conversation. But you decided to make it something else entirely. You turned this into a personal attack. You insulted my intelligence, my background, and my capabilities, all while sitting as a guest on my show. That's not professional discourse. That's cruelty and arrogance. The tension in the studio reached its peak. Meghan's composure cracked, the confidence she'd displayed crumbling into uncertainty. She glanced around again, but every face she met showed the same shock and disapproval. Michael, I think you're overreacting, she said weakly, desperation creeping into her tone. We're having a spirited discussion about important issues. Isn't that what good television is supposed to be? Challenging conversations that push boundaries? Michael shook his head slowly, his expression unyielding. He had clearly reached his limit, and there was no going back from this point. When he responded, his words were measured but filled with unmistakable finality. No, Meghan, that's not what this was. A spirited discussion involves mutual respect and good faith engagement with ideas. What you did was launch personal attacks disguised as intellectual superiority. You didn't challenge my ideas or my questions. You attacked my character and my competence. There's a world of difference between those two things. Meghan made one final attempt to regain control of the narrative, but her efforts only highlighted how completely she had misread the situation and her audience. I was simply trying to elevate the conversation beyond superficial pleasantries, she insisted. But even as she spoke, she seemed to realize how hollow her justification sounded. Sometimes real progress requires uncomfortable honesty about the limitations we all face in different areas. Michael's response was swift and devastating in its clarity. He had found his voice again, and when he spoke, it was with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he stood. Uncomfortable honesty. Is that what you call it when you suggest that my background in sports makes me intellectually unfit to interview you? Is that your version of elevating the conversation, telling me that I lack the capacity for meaningful journalism? Because, from where I'm standing, that sounds less like uncomfortable honesty and more like simple arrogance and disrespect. The studio fell completely silent, except for the sound of their voices. Camera operators kept filming, knowing instinctively that they were capturing something that would be talked about for years to come. Behind the cameras, producers were frantically trying to figure out how to handle the unprecedented situation unfolding live. Meghan made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of the interview. Her voice took on a pleading tone, a stark contrast to the aggressive confidence she had displayed earlier. Michael, please. I think we're both getting a bit heated here. Maybe we should take a step back and try to find some common ground. I certainly didn't mean to offend you personally. Perhaps I could have phrased some of my observations more diplomatically. But Michael was far beyond the point where diplomatic language could repair the damage. He looked at her with an expression that mixed disappointment with firm resolve. Meghan, the time for diplomatic language was when you first sat down in that chair. The time for finding common ground was when I welcomed you to the show and gave you every opportunity to share your message respectfully. You chose a different path. You chose to make this personal. You chose to be insulting. And you chose to treat this platform and everyone associated with it with contempt. He paused for a moment, looking directly into the camera as if speaking to the viewers at home, then turned back to her. I've been doing this job long enough to know the difference between a challenging conversation and a personal attack. I've interviewed people I disagreed with, people who had strong opinions, people who pushed back on my questions. And I've always found ways to make those interviews work because they were conducted with mutual respect. What happened here today was not that. Meghan opened her mouth to respond, but Michael continued before she could speak, his voice growing stronger and more authoritative with each sentence. You questioned my intellectual capacity. You dismissed my professional experience. You suggested that I was unfit to conduct this interview, and you did all of this while sitting as a guest on my show, using my platform, speaking to my audience. That's not challenging discourse. That's just bad behavior, and I won't tolerate it." The finality in his voice made it clear the conversation was over, but Meghan seemed unable to accept it. She remained seated, looking around the studio as if hoping someone would intervene on her behalf. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're just going to cut this short because you didn't like my tone?" Michael's response was immediate and uncompromising, delivered with the kind of authority that left no room for negotiation. "What happens now is that you leave. This interview is over. This segment is done, and you need to gather your things and go. I've given you more chances than you deserve to conduct yourself professionally, and you've chosen not to take any of them. I'm not going to provide you with another opportunity to insult me or anyone else who works here." For a moment, Meghan sat in stunned silence, unable to process what was happening. When she finally stood up, her movements were uncertain and awkward, a far cry from the confident woman who had entered the studio earlier. "This is unprecedented," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of shock and indignation. "I've never been treated this way during an interview." Michael's final response was calm and unwavering. "Maybe that's because you've never behaved this way during an interview before. Or maybe other hosts were willing to tolerate disrespectful behavior that I'm not willing to accept. Either way, this conversation is finished." As Meghan gathered her belongings and made her way toward the exit, discreetly followed by security personnel, Michael turned back to face the camera. His expression softened slightly, but his voice still carried the weight of everything that had just happened. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a quick break. Sometimes in live television, things don't go according to plan, but we always try to maintain the standards of respect and professionalism that you deserve as our viewers." The camera held on his face for a moment longer, capturing the mixture of resolve and disappointment that reflected the extraordinary circumstances of what had just occurred. As the show cut to commercial, the studio remained silent, everyone still processing what they had just witnessed.